Alex had always loved his lakeside property. Nestled at the edge of a quiet lake, it was the perfect escape from the chaos of everyday life. The small cabin and its surrounding land offered him peace and solitude, a place where he could disconnect from the world and recharge. He didn't visit often, but when he did, it felt like stepping into another dimension, far removed from responsibilities and stress. That's why he was so surprised when things started to feel off. It began with subtle signs. One day, while driving up to the property for a weekend getaway, Alex noticed a delivery truck parked near his shed. At first, he thought nothing of it. Maybe someone had taken a wrong turn or was making a drop-off nearby. But over the next few weeks, he kept seeing more trucks. Different companies, different drivers, but always the same destination, his shed. Something wasn't right. Curiosity eventually got the better of him. On one of his trips, instead of heading straight to the cabin, Alex decided to investigate. As he approached the shed, he heard voices inside, muffled but unmistakable. Peering through a crack in the wooden walls, he saw stacks of boxes neatly arranged, labels facing outward. It looked like some kind of storage operation. His heart sank as realization dawned. Someone was using his property without permission. A quick glance around confirmed his suspicions. A woman was supervising two men as they unloaded yet another batch of boxes. She seemed confident, even bossy, barking orders with an air of authority. Alex recognized her instantly. It was Karen, his neighbor from down the road. They weren't close, but they'd exchanged pleasantries a handful of times. Never once had she mentioned needing space for storage or running any kind of business, for that matter. Alex's initial reaction was anger, plain and simple. How dare she use his property like this? Who gave her the right? But as he stood there, watching her work, another emotion crept in: amusement. There was something almost comical about the situation. Here was Karen, thinking she'd found the perfect spot to stash her inventory, completely unaware that the owner was standing just a few feet away, observing everything. Instead of storming in and confronting her, Alex paused. He was known for being easygoing, but he also had a mischievous streak. This wasn't just trespassing, it was an opportunity. An idea began forming in his mind, one that would not only teach Karen a lesson, but also give him a chance to enjoy himself in the process. After all, what was the point of owning a lakeside retreat if you couldn't have a little fun? With a sly grin, Alex backed away quietly. He wouldn't say anything. Not yet. First, he needed to make sure Karen's precious inventory stayed exactly where it was. Then, he'd take care of the rest. For now, though, he let her believe she was untouchable, blissfully unaware that her secret was out, and that her plans were about to hit a major snag. Alex's mind raced as he drove away from the property that day. He could have confronted Karen right then and there, demanding answers and putting an end to her unauthorized use of his shed. But where was the fun in that? Instead, he decided to play a little game, one that would not only teach her a lesson, but also give him some much-needed entertainment. After all, life at the lake was supposed to be enjoyable, and this situation had all the makings of a good story. The first step was securing the shed. Alex knew Karen relied on quick access to her inventory, so cutting her off would throw a wrench into her plans. He returned later that evening after dark, when the property was quiet and deserted. Armed with a toolbox and a flashlight, he got to work. First, he added a second lock to the shed door, a sturdy padlock that required a key. Then he reinforced the hinges, making sure they couldn't be pried open easily. To anyone who didn't know better, the shed still looked normal from the outside. Only someone trying to get in would realize something was different. But Alex wasn't done yet. He wanted to make sure Karen couldn't sneak around the problem. His truck, which he rarely used during his visits, became part of the plan. Early the next morning, he parked it strategically near the shed, blocking the main entrance. It wasn't obvious unless you were looking for a way in, and by then, it would already be too late. Satisfied with his handiwork, Alex took one last look at the setup before heading back to the cabin to pack his bags. The boat was his favorite part of the property, and now it would serve as both his getaway vehicle and his alibi. Alex loaded up a cooler with snacks and drinks, grabbed a book he'd been meaning to read, and set off onto the lake. As the sun rose higher in the sky, he found himself smiling at the thought of Karen showing up to find her operation at a standstill. She probably assumed she was untouchable, using his shed without permission and getting away with it. Little did she know, her entire system was about to crumble. Before leaving, Alex left a note taped to the shed door. It was short and cryptic, just enough to drive Karen crazy. "Enjoy your stay." He chuckled to himself as he imagined her reaction. Would she panic? Get angry? Try to break in anyway? Whatever she did, Alex knew it wouldn't solve her problem, not while he was miles away, relaxing on the water. As the boat drifted lazily across the lake, Alex allowed himself to savor the moment. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about teaching Karen a lesson she wouldn't forget. People like her, so focused on their own goals that they trampled over others' boundaries, needed reminders that actions had consequences. And if Alex happened to enjoy himself in the process, well, that was just a bonus. By mid-afternoon, Alex was lounging on the deck of the boat, basking in the sunshine and letting his thoughts wander. He wondered how long it would take Karen to figure out what had happened. Hours, days. Maybe she'd try calling him, expecting him to come running to fix the problem she created. The idea made him laugh out loud. No matter what happened next, one thing was certain. Karen was in for a rude awakening, and Alex couldn't wait to see how it unfolded. Monday morning rolled around, and Karen arrived at the lakeside property with her usual air of confidence. She had a big day ahead of her. Orders were piling up, and customers expected their packages on time. As she pulled into the driveway, she didn't notice anything unusual at first. The shed looked the same as it always did, quiet and unassuming. But when she walked over to unlock the door, her smile quickly faded. The key wouldn't turn. At first, Karen thought it was just a simple mistake. Maybe she'd grabbed the wrong one in her rush to get out the door. She fumbled through her keys again, trying each one methodically, but none of them worked. Frustration bubbled up inside her as she jiggled the lock harder, hoping it would give way. Nothing happened. The door remained stubbornly shut. Her frustration turned to panic as she circled the shed, checking every angle for another way in. The windows were too high to reach, and the back entrance was equally inaccessible. It was almost as if someone had deliberately blocked her from getting inside. Her mind raced with possibilities. Had someone broken in? Was this some kind of prank? Or worse, had Alex finally discovered her secret? Karen whipped out her phone and started texting him furiously. "What's going on with the shed?" she wrote, hitting send before he could even reply. A minute later, "Did you change the locks?" Then another. "This isn't funny, Alex." Each message went unanswered, adding fuel to her growing anxiety. For someone who thrived on control, not knowing what was happening, or why, was unbearable. By mid-morning, Karen's stress levels were through the roof. Orders were stacking up, emails from angry customers were flooding her inbox, and her assistant was calling every 5 minutes asking where the inventory was. Every attempt Karen made to solve the problem only led to more dead ends. She tried calling Alex directly, but his phone went straight to voicemail. She paced back and forth, muttering under her breath, convinced that he was behind whatever was happening. Her desperation reached new heights when she spotted the note taped to the shed door. Tearing it off, she read the words scrawled in bold letters. Asterisk, enjoy your stay. Asterisk. The message was cryptic, almost mocking. Who said something like that unless they were messing with her? Karen crumpled the paper in her fist, her face flushed with anger. This wasn't just inconvenient. It felt personal. As the hours ticked by, Karen became increasingly unhinged. She called a locksmith, pacing impatiently while waiting for them to arrive. When they finally showed up, She hovered over them, urging them to hurry. But even then, nothing seemed to work. The lock was jammed, the hinges were reinforced, and no matter how hard they tried, the door refused to budge. Defeated, the locksmith shrugged and told her there was nothing more he could do. Standing alone in front of the shed, Karen felt utterly powerless. Her perfect system, the one she built to keep her business running smoothly, had been dismantled in an instant. And worst of all, she had no idea who was responsible or what they wanted from her. All she knew was that her carefully constructed world was falling apart, piece by piece. Meanwhile, miles away on the lake, Alex sipped his coffee, watching the ripples in the water and smiling at the chaos he'd unleashed. By Tuesday afternoon, Karen's desperation had reached its peak. The locksmith's failure to open the shed left her with no other options. Orders were piling up, customers were growing impatient, and her once thriving business was teetering on the edge of disaster. She couldn't afford to wait any longer. If she didn't find a way into that shed, and fast, she risked losing everything she'd worked so hard to build. In a last-ditch effort, Karen hired a second locksmith, this time opting for a more expensive service that specialized in emergency situations. "They'll get it open," she muttered to herself as she paced back and forth near the shed. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications from angry clients and frantic employees, but she ignored them all, focusing solely on the task at hand. This time, she told herself, things would be different. This time, she'd regain control. The new locksmith arrived promptly, armed with tools and confidence. He examined the lock carefully, nodding as if he understood the challenge ahead. Karen hovered nearby, biting her nails and watching his every move. Minutes ticked by like hours as he worked, occasionally grunting or adjusting his grip on the tools. Just when Karen began to feel a flicker of hope, the unthinkable happened. Alex appeared. Alex's arrival was unexpected and perfectly timed. He strolled up casually, his hands tucked into his pockets, looking as calm as if he'd just come to check the mail. His boat was tied up at the dock, evidence of his recent return from his lakeside retreat. Seeing him there, standing so nonchalantly while her world unraveled, sent Karen into a tailspin. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp with accusation. "Did you do this? Did you sabotage my business?" Alex raised an eyebrow, unfazed by her outburst. "Your business," he repeated slowly, letting the words sink in. "Funny. I thought this was my property." Karen froze, her face turning red. For a moment, she seemed caught between outrage and embarrassment. Then, she launched into a defensive tirade. "I needed space, okay? It's not like you use this place anyway. I was going to tell you eventually. Maybe. Eventually." Alex interrupted, his tone icy but controlled. "You mean after you'd already taken over without asking?" "That's not how this works, Karen." The locksmith paused mid-task, sensing the tension between them. He glanced awkwardly between Karen and Alex, clearly unsure whether to continue working or pack up and leave. Karen barely noticed. Her focus was entirely on Alex now. She stepped closer, pointing a finger at him. "This is ridiculous. You can't just lock me out like this. Do you have any idea what you're costing me?" "Oh, I think I do," Alex replied coolly. "But let's talk about what you've cost me first. Using my property without permission, damaging my shed, disrespecting my boundaries. Sounds like we're pretty even." Karen opened her mouth to argue but stopped short. She knew deep down that she was in the wrong, but admitting it felt impossible. Instead, she tried to shift the blame. "If you'd been easier to reach, none of this would have happened," she snapped. "You're never around." Alex crossed his arms, leaning slightly forward. "And whose fault is that? You didn't exactly go out of your way to ask permission, did you? No, you just assumed you could take what you wanted because it was convenient for you." The argument escalated quickly, with both parties trading barbs under the watchful eyes of the locksmith, who had wisely stepped back to avoid getting caught in the crossfire. Karen's frustration boiled over, her voice rising louder with each passing minute. But Alex remained unshaken, his calm demeanor only fueling her anger further. Finally, realizing she wasn't going to win this battle, Karen threw up her hands in exasperation. "Fine. What do you want from me, Alex? Money? An apology? Just tell me how to fix this." Alex smirked faintly, enjoying the upper hand. "We'll get to that," he said. "But first, let's make one thing clear. You're done using my property. And if you want your stuff back, you'll play by my rules." As Karen stood fuming, defeated and humiliated, Alex turned to the locksmith. "Sorry for the trouble," he said politely. "Looks like we won't be needing your services today." With that, he walked away, leaving Karen to stew in her own mess. The confrontation on the dock was the moment of truth, and Alex knew it. He had played his cards carefully up to this point, securing the shed, leaving Karen in the dark, and timing his return perfectly. But now it was time to lay everything out in the open. As Karen followed him down to the water's edge, still fuming but visibly shaken, Alex turned to face her. The calm surface of the lake mirrored his demeanor, steady, unflappable, and impossible to rattle. "Let's cut to the chase," Alex began, his voice firm but not loud. "You used my property without asking. You treated it like it belonged to you. And when I found out, I decided to teach you a lesson." He paused, letting his words sink in. Karen opened her mouth to protest, but Alex held up a hand, silencing her before she could speak. "Before you say anything, think about how this looks from my perspective. Would you be okay with someone doing the same thing to you?" Karen hesitated, her anger momentarily giving way to guilt. She glanced around as if searching for an escape, but there was none. The weight of what she'd done hung heavy in the air between them. Still, she wasn't ready to admit defeat entirely. "I didn't mean any harm," she muttered, crossing her arms defensively. "It's just, I needed space, and yours was sitting empty." It seemed harmless at the time. "Harmless," Alex repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Breaking into someone else's property isn't harmless, Karen. Neither is using it for your business without permission. If you wanted space, you should have asked, or better yet, rented a proper storage unit like everyone else." Karen shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. She knew he was right, but admitting it felt like swallowing her pride whole. Instead, she tried to steer the conversation toward damage control. "Okay, fine. I messed up. What do you want me to do now?" Alex leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. He had already planned this part of the conversation. "First, you're going to remove every single box from my shed. Today. Under my supervision." He pointed toward the shed, emphasizing his demand. "Second, you're going to pay for the damages you caused. That includes fixing the lock you broke, covering wear and tear fees, and compensating me for the unauthorized use of my property." Karen's jaw dropped. "That's ridiculous," she exclaimed, throwing her hands up in frustration. "You can't just charge me for something like that." "I can," Alex replied simply, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was a detailed bill, itemizing the costs he intended to charge her. He handed it to Karen, who scanned it quickly, her eyes widening with each line. "If you don't agree, we can take this to court. But trust me, that'll cost you a lot more than this." For a moment, Karen looked like she might argue further. Her pride bristled at the thought of paying him anything, let alone such a steep amount. Yet deep down, she knew she didn't have much of a choice. Alex had her cornered, and dragging this out would only make things worse for her reputation, her business, and her peace of mind. Finally, after a long pause, she sighed heavily. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "I'll do it. But this isn't over, Alex." "It is for me," Alex responded calmly, turning away from her. "Oh, and one more thing," he added over his shoulder. "Next time you need space, try asking first. Who knows? I might even say yes." With that, Alex walked back toward the cabin, leaving Karen standing alone on the dock. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and water. For the first time in days, the tension in the air began to lift. Alex had made his point, and Karen, humbled and defeated, had no choice but to accept it. As she trudged back toward the shed to begin the long process of clearing out her inventory, Karen couldn't help but replay the events of the past few days in her mind. She had been so sure of herself, so convinced that she could get away with bending the rules. Now she realized just how wrong she'd been, and how costly shortcuts could truly be. Karen spent the rest of the day hauling boxes out of the shed, her frustration mounting with every trip. Alex stood nearby, arms crossed, watching silently as she and her small team worked. He didn't gloat or rub it in. He didn't need to. The sight of Karen lugging heavy cartons under the hot sun was punishment enough. Sweat poured down her face, her shirt clung to her back, and her hands were sore from gripping tape-covered edges. Each box felt heavier than the last, not just because of its contents, but because of the weight of her mistakes. At first, Karen tried to maintain some semblance of dignity, barking orders at her assistants and muttering under her breath about how unfair the situation was. But as the hours dragged on, her resolve began to crumble. She stopped shouting and started sighing, her shoulders slumping with exhaustion. Every time she glanced over at Alex, who remained infuriatingly calm, she felt a fresh wave of humiliation wash over her. By late afternoon, the shed was finally empty. Boxes were stacked haphazardly near Karen's truck, ready to be loaded for transport. Her team packed up quickly, eager to leave the scene of their boss's public defeat. As they drove off, Karen lingered behind, staring at the now barren shed. It looked almost peaceful, like it had before she turned it into her personal storage center. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what might have happened if she'd simply asked Alex for permission instead of taking matters into her own hands. Alex approached her then, holding out the bill he prepared earlier. "Here," he said evenly. "Let's settle this so we can both move on." Karen hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly as she took the paper from him. She scanned it again, though she already knew the total by heart. It wasn't astronomical. Alex wasn't trying to bankrupt her, but it stung all the same. Reluctantly, she pulled out her checkbook and wrote the payment, her pen scratching angrily against the page. When she handed it to him, their eyes met briefly. There was no triumph in Alex's gaze, only a quiet finality. He nodded once, pocketed the check, and turned to walk away. As Karen climbed into her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that this ordeal had changed her, or at least, it should. She replayed the confrontation in her mind, dissecting every decision that had led her here. Renting legitimate storage space would have cost money, sure, but nowhere near as much as this fiasco had. More importantly, it wouldn't have damaged her reputation or forced her to confront the uncomfortable truth about herself. She'd been selfish, entitled, and careless. Driving home, Karen found herself thinking about Alex. Despite everything, he hadn't been cruel. He could have called the authorities, filed charges, or made her life far more difficult than he did. Instead, he'd handled the situation with restraint and fairness, teaching her a lesson without resorting to spite. It was humbling and infuriating to admit, but she respected him for it. When she arrived back at her house, Karen sat in her car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. This incident wasn't just a hiccup in her business plan. It was a wake-up call. If she wanted to succeed, not just financially but as a person, she needed to approach things differently. Cutting corners might save time and money in the short term, but the long-term costs weren't worth it. Respecting boundaries, owning up to mistakes, and treating others fairly weren't weaknesses. They were strengths. For now, Karen vowed to put this mess behind her. She'd pay the bill, learn from the experience, and try to rebuild the trust she'd broken. With Alex and with herself. Whether she succeeded remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. She'd never look at a lakeside shed the same way again. In the days that followed, Word of Karen's misadventure spread through their small lakeside community like wildfire. People whispered about it over coffee at the local cafe, shared knowing glances at the grocery store, and even chuckled during casual conversations. It wasn't just gossip, it was a story too good not to share. Everyone knew Alex as the quiet, easygoing neighbor who kept to himself, so the idea of him outsmarting someone as bold and ambitious as Karen made for an irresistible tale. Opinions were divided, of course. Some people sympathized with Karen, acknowledging her entrepreneurial drive and pointing out that she hadn't caused any real harm. She just got carried away, they'd say, shaking their heads. Others, however, sided firmly with Alex, praising him for standing up to someone who thought she could take advantage of others without consequence. If she wanted space, she should have asked. One elderly woman declared loudly at the farmer's market, "You can't go around using other people's property like it's yours." For his part, Alex didn't engage in the chatter. He returned to his usual routine, spending weekends at the lake fishing, reading, or tinkering with his boat. When neighbors brought up the incident, he simply shrugged and said, "It's over now." No hard feelings. His calm response only added to his reputation as the kind of person who handled conflict with grace and humor. While some admired Karen's determination, most agreed that Alex had handled the situation perfectly, fairly but firmly. As for Karen, she kept a low profile in the weeks after the ordeal. She avoided running into Alex whenever possible, ducking into side aisles at the store or taking alternate routes when driving past his property. But avoiding the topic altogether wasn't an option, not with the way people kept bringing it up. At first, she tried to laugh it off, brushing aside comments with jokes about learning lessons the hard way. Over time, though, she began to own the narrative. She admitted, to herself and eventually to others, that she'd been wrong, and that Alex had every right to act as he did. Her business also underwent changes. Determined to rebuild trust and prove she learned from the experience, Karen invested in proper storage facilities and tightened her operations. She started communicating more openly with clients, ensuring transparency and accountability. Slowly but surely, her reputation began to recover. By the end of the summer, she was back on track, running her business with renewed focus and integrity. Meanwhile, Alex made subtle improvements to his property, installing better locks and security cameras to prevent future incidents. He didn't hold a grudge against Karen, nor did he gloat about his victory. In fact, when they crossed paths months later at a neighborhood barbecue, he greeted her warmly, acting as if nothing had ever happened. Karen, still feeling a mix of guilt and gratitude, thanked him quietly for handling the situation the way he had. "I deserved it," she admitted, surprising them both with her honesty. Alex smiled faintly and nodded, letting the moment pass without further comment. By autumn, life at the lake had returned to its peaceful rhythm. The shed stood empty once again, its doors securely locked. Alex spent more time there, enjoying the crisp air and golden sunsets. Occasionally, he'd think back to the events of the summer, the confrontation, the chaos, the unexpected entertainment, and smile to himself. It had been messy, sure, but it had also reminded him of something important. Boundaries mattered, and enforcing them didn't have to mean burning bridges. As for Karen, she occasionally drove by the property, glancing at the shed with a mixture of regret and resolve. She'd learned a valuable lesson about respect, responsibility, and the importance of playing by the rules. Whether she truly changed remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: she wouldn't make the same mistake twice. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.